Recording. Right. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Illumine our hearts, O Master, who lovest mankind, with the pure light of thy divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to the understanding of thy gospel teachings. Implant in us also the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living. Both thinking and doing such things as are well pleasing unto thee, for thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God. Unto thee we ascribe glory, together with thy Father, who is from everlasting, and thine all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Sam. Amen.
Morning, Rick.
Morning. Did you buy those shoes?
Well, welcome, everyone. Glad you're all here this morning. Continuing our discussion on Jesus Christ, the life and teachings. And we're continuing with talking about Jesus Christ as the Son of Man. And we've been talking about the circumstances surrounding his birth. And we'll continue on this week. And just to summarize, as we've seen, the evangelists Matthew and Luke are the two gospels that describe the events accompanying the birth of Jesus, and they go into a fair amount of detail: the adoration of the Magi and the shepherds, the circumcision of Jesus, which is 8 days after his birth, so that would be on January 1st on our calendar, and his presentation in the temple 40 days after his birth. Now, regarding the presentation of Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem, I'm going to just point out one thing that we sometimes don't talk about very often, and that Simeon, the God-bearer, received Christ, and he, of course, it says, "Lord, let thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word." And then he says something interesting to the Virgin Mary. He says, "Yea, a sword shall pierce through your own soul also." And according to Metropolitan Hilarion, this is the very first prophecy in the Gospels of Christ's sufferings and the sufferings of his mother connected to them. And you see this icon here. I didn't know this existed until just a few days ago, and it's called the icon of 7 swords, or the icon of Simeon's prophecy. And as you can see, it's the Virgin Mary, one of the few icons of her without Jesus Christ, the infant, with her. And the 7 swords, I read, represent the fullness of the pain that she suffered. Now, in the church tradition, the teaching arose that at Jesus's birth, Mary did not experience the usual pains of childbirth. According to St. John of Damascus, the Most Holy Virgin brought Jesus into the world without suffering the pains that adhere to our nature. In other words, how every other woman brings forth children into the world with pretty severe labor pains. However, Metropolitan says, yet she experienced this pain when she stood by the cross of Jesus, when she beheld him whom she knew to be God by the manner of his generation, killed as a malefactor. So the pain that she did not experience during childbirth was experienced in its fullest at the cross when he was crucified. And I'm going to go just a little bit further with this. The full prophecy of Simeon is actually, behold, he says to Mary, behold, this child, Jesus, is set for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and for a sin which shall be spoken against. Yet a sword shall pierce through thine own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed.
That sword is down below.
Yes, this is a variation of the same icon that we saw before. In this case, still 7 swords, but we have 6, 6, and 1 from below. I'm not sure why they're different, but they both represent the same thing.
Their face is different too. This one seems not sad.
Right. You're right. I don't know whether the iconographer just did this, according to their prayerful understanding, but you're right. She doesn't seem to be as in pain, I guess, as the previous icon.
She seems to be embracing the swords,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the others were pointed at her and stabbing her.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And here she's sort of cradling them.
Can you go back to the other one? Can you just flip back to the other one?
Sure.
Just a second.
Now here she's kind of holding them, but the look on her face is more mournful. So, but again, I think that they still represent the same thing. So the explanation here is just as Jesus would be pierced with nails and a spear, so the soul of the most pure one would be pierced by a certain weapon of sorrow and pain in the heart when she saw her son suffering. Now, also the second part of that is that after that, and heretofore, hidden thoughts of people regarding the Messiah would be revealed, and they would face a choice to be with Christ or to be against him. And so that's the fullness of that prophecy. And so everyone, once they face Christ and his suffering and resurrection, you have a choice. Do you accept it and you are with Christ, or do you reject it and are against him? So just thought I'd kind of bring that up because we don't talk about that very often. The feast of the meeting of the Lord, the presentation, is on February 2nd. So around that time, we'll be talking more about that feast. So going back to the Nativity of Christ, events that took place approximately 2 years after Jesus' birth are described in Matthew. These are the flight of Joseph and Mary with the infant into Egypt, and the slaughter or massacres of the innocents, the infants, by the enraged King Herod in Bethlehem and its environment. Of these stories, the only one that has a parallel in historic literature outside of the Christian tradition is the massacre of the infants. One of the pagan authors, a Roman author named Macrobius, in his work, The Saturnalia, talks about that event. Now, Herod was an extremely cruel man. He had no qualms about killing children, adults, and as a matter of fact, he executed 3 of his own sons. They were not infants, they were adults, and he was so paranoid about his throne that he killed 3 of his adult children, who he felt would be a threat to his power. He also killed his wife and his brother-in-law. The list goes on and on. So a very cruel man. So the fact that he, killed 14,000 or thereabouts children in Bethlehem, I guess, is not unheard of for him.
What's that Saturnalia book? Is that like just a historical record of the time?
Yes.
Kind of thing?
Yeah. I think, like I said, he was a Roman author, so it was probably well known. This was about 4 or 5 centuries after Christ.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't contemporary with the event, but at any rate, he does mention it.
Did Herod's wife and brother-in-law die at the same time, or?
I think they were killed separately.
So it wasn't that they were looking at each other or anything like that?
No. No, actually. Although, you know, with that kind of situation, who knows? So, his wife, his wife was actually a member of the royal family that preceded Herod. And I think that he was so paranoid that he killed her off and all the males of her family to make sure that no one would try to claim throne.
How long was he in power?
I'm gonna say about 40 years or so.
Oh.
Yeah. I think he died around 4 BC. I think he took power sometime around 30 BC, so around that time.
He died BC?
Yes, yes. Everything, you know, we talked about when Christ was born, he was born probably around 6 BC.
Christ was born in 6 BC?
Yeah, but the way that we reckon AD BC is actually not accurate as far as the true calendar. But in reality, Christ was born around 6 BC. And Herod died around 4 BC.
So this isn't actually 2024.
That's right. We're younger than
That's right. I just gave it.
So the stories and circumstances connected with Jesus' birth are interesting, not just because they're historical, but from a theological perspective. Everything that happens that we're going to be talking about has a theological meaning, and that's really the important part. And all of these stories really accentuate the nature of Jesus' birth. It was special. It transcends the boundaries of normal human history. And so we talked about the genealogy of Jesus. We have angels appearing to the shepherds in the field. Joseph has dreams and other details of the story that illustrate the fundamental message that God has intervened in human history by sending his Messiah, his son, to earth, who is coming to fulfill the hopes and expectations of the chosen people, because that's how they were chosen to prepare the world for the coming of the Messiah. So we'll talk a little bit more today about the Magi themselves. The Magi came from the east to Jerusalem. Now, in the account of the wise men from the east, the evangelists really don't give a lot of details describing their origin and occupation. The term wise men, from the Greek magi, in classical literature was used quite widely, and in a narrow sense, it could denote priests of the Zoroastrian religion, which was very common in Persia and parts of Babylon at that time. Also could refer to Babylonian astrologer priests, and not astronomers, but astrologers who looked at constellations and all of the things we talked about with astrology, or in a broader sense, astrologers in general, or diviners, or what we would call magicians, not card tricks and sleight of hand, but working in what we would call black magic. The word magi is the origin of the word magic in English language. So these were pagans who believed in sorcery and other things like that. Now, since the story of the wise men from the east, they're from the east, we surmise that, taking into account the geographical location of Bethlehem and Palestine, that they came from Persia or Babylon. One of the early Christians, Justin Martyr, in the 2nd century, believed they came from Arabia, which in his time referred to Arabia Petraea, which is Petra, which is a modern day Jordan. But that's where he thought they came from. I think the prevailing belief now is they came from Persia / Babylon,
But they were pagans.
but they were pagans, correct?
So what do you think is the significance to us of their visiting the Christ child, that they're pagans? I mean, I don't quite,
They're the first Gentiles
I see.
to be drawn to Christ. And that's the significance of them. And we'll see in a moment why they were drawn. Now, according to the tradition of the church, the star appeared in the east at the time of the Annunciation, and that led the Magi for around 9 months. If you think about it, to go from Persia to Bethlehem on camelback, horseback, walking would probably take 9-10 months thereabouts. The tradition of the church never held that the star was a truly celestial star, but that it was in some invisible power transformed into this appearance and made visible to men. Now, however, there was, and there is still, a belief by Orthodox Christians that goes back to as far back as 1614, the German astronomer Johannes Kepler proposed that the star that they saw appeared as a result of the conjunction of the two planets Jupiter, which was called the king star because Jupiter was the king of the pagan gods, and Saturn. And Saturn was the Jewish star. Why? Because Saturn, Saturn's day, the Jewish holy day was Sabbath, Saturday. So the king star and the Jewish star were coming into conjunction and formed a very bright looking star.
So in the previous paragraph, where it says it was like that mystical power, could it be likened to the pillar of fire at night and smoke by day that led the Jews through the wilderness?
That is one of the thoughts that some of the early Christian writers had. In my personal opinion, this is not theology, but my opinion is that the two are not mutually exclusive. There could have been a conjunction of Saturn and Venus, Saturn and Jupiter, that caught the attention of these magi. Don't forget, they spent a lot of their time looking at the stars, and suddenly there is this conjunction. And in fact, going back to this last slide, in 7 BC, it's been recorded that there was a conjunction of the two planets. So it did historically occur. Now, to complement that, it is also held in the church that the Magi discovered a prophecy of the Old Testament prophet Balaam. And that prophecy, which is in the book of Numbers, says, "A star shall arise out of Jacob, and a scepter," that is a ruler, a king, "shall arise out of Israel." Once they read that, they understood the mystery concerning Christ, and so they came desiring to see him that had been born. So they see a star, the king's star, and the Jewish star coming together, king of the Jews. They see this prophecy. Aha, something's going on here. And so, as we read in the gospel, "We have seen his star in the east." Now, the appearance of the star that heralded the birth of Christ, of Jesus, and the adoration of the wise men before him was already being interpreted in the early church as a symbol of how Christianity was to subdue paganism and magic. And St. Ignatius of Antioch, very early 2nd century father of the church, he was, I think, the second bishop of Antioch after the church was established, wrote this concerning the star. He said, "A star shone in heaven brighter than all the stars, and its light was indescribable, and its newness brought amazement. All the other stars with the sun and the moon formed a chorus to the star whose light surpassed all other." And this is where I say, kind of what you're saying, Rebecca. I think it started out as a real celestial occurrence, and then I think it became enhanced by divine intervention, by divine power.
Was there just 3 wise men, or was there?
There were 3 that we know of. The church tradition says that there were 3 that came and came to the adoration of the Christ child.
I mean, such a big deal event, you know, maybe they're telling their buddies, "Hey, man." You know,
There may have been more than 3. But, we know of three that brought three gifts: frankincense, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They probably had an entourage as well. So, but we recognize three as, the three Gentiles that now came to Christ.
What were the religions of the time? I mean, there's obviously Jewish.
Yeah, there's Zoroastrianism was popular in
And a lot of just
the
pagan
Middle
religion.
East, and that was a pagan religion. There were Egyptian pagans, obviously they had their own religion. The Greeks had their religion. Wow, we're getting the full house here.
There's a spot up here.
There's,
No, I didn't think of it. Yeah.
so the Greek, so the outside world had multiple pagan religions. They all worship different pagan gods that kind of related to each other: Zeus, Jupiter, Saturn. I can't remember who the Greek counterpart was, but they all had their names. So there was great agitation concerning this star, as it was new and unlike any other. Saint Ignatius goes on to say, so all sorcery was undone and every bond of evil brought to nothing. Ignorance was destroyed and the ancient realm, that is the pagan realm, brought down as God appeared in human nature for the renewal of the eternal life. And finally, what had been prepared by God received its beginning. So God has prepared the Jewish nation to receive the Messiah, and now he is signaling to the pagan world, something's going on, and we're going to get rid of all of this sorcery, all of this magic, and you're going to now worship the true God and the true life.
Charlie?
Yeah.
And is that why the fathers of the church picked December 25th for Christmas, because of so many pagan rituals and everything that went on around the winter solstice?
That's a very good point, Donna, and that's exactly what happened. Around December 25th, there was the Saturnalia, which similar to the book that we looked at. There was also the Feast of Sol Invictus, the unconquerable God. And so what Christianity did was say, well, the real incomparable God is this person who was born on this day, Jesus Christ. And it kind of Christianized the pagan rituals and festivals around that time and made them centered on Jesus Christ rather than on the pagan gods.
Was it actually December 25th, or was there even a calendar back then?
There was a calendar. He was probably born more toward late winter, early spring. But it was the fact that the pagan world was full of, especially the Roman world, was full of this Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, soul, that they started to Christianize it.
Charlie, so date certain for the Annunciation, that would call into question that date then as well?
Well, the Annunciation is 9 months prior to obviously December 25th. So, yeah, whatever the actual date of Jesus's birth, the Annunciation would be 9 months prior to that. But the church has established those dates, and so that's what we follow.
Well, you're throwing our whole calendar off.
Well, I won't even go into the old calendar. Yes, the Gregorian calendar. Many Orthodox Christians, particularly in European Russia, celebrate Christmas on January 6th because they're, yeah, and Romanians.
Romania, no,
No, oh, Romanians don't.
only Serbia.
Yeah, so Serbians, that's correct. So calendar dates are arbitrary, quite frankly, but since our church follows the Gregorian calendar, we celebrate it. But now, you look at Easter, and Easter is what has been established, I believe, at the first ecumenical council. And it was the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the Jewish Passover. For various reasons, which I won't go into now, but so we follow what the church directs us to. What's important for us is the event, not necessarily the calendar date per se.
I thought it had something to do with clearance Easter candy.
And that's always a good thing. So, when you hear star, don't think it was a star that we often see, but a divine and angelic power that appeared in the form of a star. So that's why I say it may have started as a celestial event, but I think God also intervened and brought it into a more divine situation. The Magi were astrologers, and so the Lord used what was familiar to them to draw them to himself. He knew they were going to be looking at the stars. He goes, okay, here you go. Here's a star like you haven't seen. Just like when Jesus called the first apostles, Peter and Andrew, what did he do? He told them, put your net out and catch some fish. And they're like, well, we've been out all night catching fish. Just do it. They caught a ton of fish. They couldn't even, the nets wouldn't hold it. So God used what is familiar to those people to draw them to him. Astrologers, look at the stars. Fishermen, here's some fish. The same idea. The star was an angelic power, and it is apparent from the fact that it shone even by the day, and it moved as they moved, stood still as they rested, and it moved from Persia in the north to Jerusalem in the south. A star does not move north to south, you know. So this star had extra special powers. We saw his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. These magi are seen to possess great virtue, says Saint Theophylact in his commentary on the gospel. For if they came to worship Christ in a strange land, how much more would they preach him with great boldness in Persia? So as you can see, they were almost like apostles to the Gentiles. And that's why the church fathers hold that the Magi were the first Gentiles to be drawn to Christ. We know that Jews were drawn to him. And in fact, the first ones drawn to him were the shepherds in the fields. And so both Jews and Gentiles. And over the next few weeks, you will hear this hymn, which members of the choir, you will recognize, thy nativity, O Christ our God, has given rise to the light of knowledge in the world. For they that worship the stars did learn therefrom to worship thee, O Sun, S-U-N, of justice. We're talking about celestial objects and the sun god being worshipped by the pagans. But now we're Christianizing it, and we're calling him the Son of Justice. This is from Malachi. He calls him actually the Son of Righteousness, Son of Justice, same thing. And to know that thou, Christ, did come from the east of the highest, O Lord, glory to thee. So you can see how this is all coming together. And this is why the star and the Magi are important to us. And you see the one Majus pointing to the star and saying, hey, this is what we're looking at. This is why we're coming. And lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them. The star was hidden for a time by God's providence, so that they should inquire of the Jews, and Herod would be troubled, and thus the truth would be made all the more apparent. So the star is visible to them. They go to Jerusalem, they talk to Herod, the star is gone. And no one sees it. And then the Magi say, we have seen the star in the east. Who is this? Where has he been born? We want to know. We're going to worship him. And Herod calls the chief priests and the scribes, and they say, yeah, Bethlehem of Judea, this is what the Malachi says in his prophecy. So they leave, when
So
they
they were-
departed
They were
Jerusalem.
aware that prophet was being born.
Yeah. Yeah, Malachi in his prophecy said there was a prophecy that in Bethlehem, Ephrata of Judea will come a governor, will be born. So the Magi departed from Jerusalem, and again the star appeared and guided the Magi from there to Bethlehem, from which it's clear that the star had divine power. The star went before them, and it came and stood over where the young child was. In this icon, we see the ray coming literally directly on the Christ child. The Magi come while Christ is still in Bethlehem. They're no longer in the manger. I think we talked about this last week. By this time, Joseph had found a home where they could stay. And so they are in a house. And in fact, the gospel says that the Magi came to the house where the virgin and the child were, and they came and adored him, worshiped him. This too was extraordinary, for the star descended from the heights and came closer to the earth to show them the place. This could not have been a regular star to point out where Christ was because it came and literally stood over his head. And so that's why I say I think there's a combination of a celestial and an angelic power all coming together to point to this child right here. Now, as I said before, the angel appeared in the fields to the shepherds, also to announce the same thing. In the opening chapters of the Gospel of Matthew, the angels played a great role in the birth of Christ. And in the Old Testament, there are many stories about the appearance of angels to men. Angels are perceived not just as messengers from God, but heralds of the divine will, and also participants in human history. So angels had a lot of interaction with human beings, particularly from the beginning of the nation of Israel. Angels serve as the connecting link between the world of men and the celestial world in which God abides. They're sort of the intermediaries. They go between both worlds. They abide in heaven, but they come down to earth to give messages and to interact with human beings by God's command.
Is there any report of angels now?
Pardon?
Any report of angels now?
I don't know, has anybody heard angelic reports? I have not. I think they still interact with us. I think they interact with us in a spiritual way. Every baptized Christian has a guardian angel that's been assigned to that person. And so if we're spiritually aware, I think we do have interaction with our angel. In fact, we have prayers to our guardian angel. In your prayer book, you open it up, you'll see a prayer to your guardian angel. And one of the things I think a spiritual practice that we maybe neglect, that we can get more in tune with, is get in tune with your spiritual guide. And in fact, and if you listen to the litany today, an angel of peace, a faithful guide, a guardian of our souls and bodies. We say that every divine liturgy, and that's really what it means. We have an angel of peace who is a protector and guide of our soul and body. So I think, Bob, it does happen. I think we're just not aware of it as much.
Maybe they just got rid of the wings.
Yeah, well, the wings actually are there. That's their, what they would, we call them bodiless powers. They have an essence, and the closest that we could describe it are wings, sort of flowing, nondescript,
Six-winged,
something, six-winged, many-eyed,
soaring aloft.
soaring aloft, born on their pinions,
Yes,
singing the triumph of him.
shouting proclaim.
Saying, exactly. And they're in there, by the way, during our divine liturgy, singing, worshiping with us. the liturgy that's going on in heaven is going on in our church as well, concurrently, all around the world, at all times, in every hour, and around.
Charlie,
Yes,
I would just, because I thought I recalled the Bible verse, this might be one of many. This is from Psalm 34:7. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. Psalm 91:11. He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Daniel, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. So that, I guess they are, interacting with us, we may not. We could be aware of it, I guess, if we focused on it more, maybe.
thank you, Rick. Exactly. Thank you for those verses, because that just reinforces the fact that they're with us, they interact with us. God gives them to us for those things. And so, yeah, part of our spiritual exercises during times of Advent and Lent and other things is to get spiritually in touch with our guardian angel. Angel appeared to the shepherds because they were simple and guileless. It's clear they even imitated the way of life of the righteous. Jacob, Moses, and David were all shepherds. They weren't born into these royal families. They weren't born into wealthy, powerful families. They were humble shepherds, and they lived that kind of life. The angel did not appear to the Pharisees and scribes in Jerusalem, for they were vessels of every kind of cunning. And they certainly confirmed that when Jesus was an adult and during his ministry, all they did was harangue him and harass him and try to trip him up. But in the end, he overcame that. But again, who did the shepherds announce it to? Not the big guys in Jerusalem, but the shepherds in the field. And the shepherds were without guile. They were simple, and they were counted worthy of the vision of divine things. And God showed that immediately from the beginning. He chose them because of their simplicity. And what does the gospel say? They departed and they proclaimed all that they had witnessed. So just like the Magi who went back to Persia and preached Christ, the Jewish shepherds did the same thing. And they went and so they're some of the first apostles as well. So you see how the whole world is now being drawn to Christ. Not just the Jewish nation, not just the pagan, but all together. Being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi departed another way. So let's consider the sequence of events. First, God guided them by means of the star. Then they came to Jerusalem, and God taught them through the prophet Micah that Christ was to be born in Bethlehem. Finally, they were warned by means of an angel in a dream. They obeyed the warning, the divine speech. They received the warning, accepted the revelation, and they deceived Herod. They didn't go back to Herod and say, yeah, we found him. Here he is. They left. They departed by another way, and they were not afraid of being pursued by Herod or his soldiers, but they were bold in the power of him that had been born, and they were true witnesses and confessors. So now, this is again from St. Theophylact in his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew. I never looked at the Magi this way until I read these things and realized that they weren't just three guys that saw a star and came, but they literally were actually used as confessors and preachers back in their country.
Did they do any writing or anything? Do we have any?
Not that we know of. Not that we know. But again, when the 12 apostles went after Christ's resurrection and ascension, they went to Persia, they went to Babylon, they went all through the pagan world. And my feeling is that because these Magi went out there as predecessors to them, that the pagan world would accept that.
Just having an aha moment. But I also want to add, you can, if you find yourself ever in Cologne, Germany, their relics are enshrined there.
Oh,
At
wow.
the Cologne Dome, it's the oldest cathedral in all of Germany.
Oh, wow.
And they have the relics. I had the honor of venerating them. We were in Cologne in January of 2020 before the world shut down. And I had just learned that. I went over our hotels across the street. And they were originally in Constantinople. There was a church built there. And then they were in the early hundreds, they were brought to Milan. And then the Germans came and they took them back and gave them to the bishop in Cologne. And that's where they've been ever since.
Wow. That is so interesting. So I did not realize that. Well, thank you, Becky. That's good information.
Becky, was that a Catholic church or was that?
It was Catholic. It was, the cathedral was built in 1100 something, so it wasn't too far away from the split. So it's a
Yeah.
really, really old church, but there were Christians in Cologne, because there's a wall there from like 50 AD. But that talks about the Christians that would meet there.
Wow.
So there was an early church there.
Dome.
Yeah.
Dome, yeah.
Yeah, we have to remember too, apostolic Christianity went to Western Europe, fairly soon after the original apostles, the second generation, Saint Irenaeus of Lyon. And then from there, it spread from Gaul to Germania and the rest of Europe, and even into the British Isles. So early on, apostolic preaching was throughout the world. So Herod is not happy. He got mocked by the Magi. And so this resulted in the unfortunate massacre. It says 14,000 infants. The church recognizes there were thousands, maybe hundreds of infants that were killed by Herod because of he had been mocked and because he was afraid of what he had heard. Matthew says, then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked by the wise men, was exceedingly wroth. Saint Romanos, the hymnographer, relates how Herod listened to the sayings of the prophets that he might ascertain better who the child was and where he might be found. And Saint Romanos says the anxiety which Herod had always feared, and we know he was afraid even of his own family, now came to him when he did not wish it. For when he had not expected, he learned on hearing the sayings of the prophets. Now, not just the prophet Micah, that there was a child born in Bethlehem of Judea, but he says he heard the prophecy of Isaiah, for a child is born to us and a son is given to us, whose government is upon his shoulders, and his name is called the Angel of Great Counsel. So I'm sure the chief priests and the scribes, when he called them, he said, tell me all about this child. What have you heard? And they gave him even more prophecies. And so this sent him into a complete rage. St. Cosmas, another hymnographer, writes that Herod reckoned the time the guiding star had appeared, which brought the Magi to Bethlehem, there to worship Christ with gifts. So we've heard earlier that the star appeared about 9 months prior to Jesus' birth. Mulling over his thoughts, Herod pondered how he could most quickly destroy the infant whom the Magi proclaimed. Then, after calculating the time of the appearance of the star, 9 months, and he also had been gone from Jerusalem for about a year. The Magi left and Herod went to Rome. And this was not unusual. Herod's father actually went to Rome and got him the kingship of Judea from the Roman emperor, because Herod was not a Jew. He was an Idumean. He was from the country of Edom. And so he was a false king. And so he went to Rome. And so he says, Okay, I was given 12 months plus 9 months, at 21 months that the child was born. Well, just to be sure, I'm gonna have all the infants slain that were 24 months or younger, all the male infants, 24. Just to make sure I get this kid, because he's a threat to me. So Matthew says, Herod sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and that is all the male children, and all the coasts thereof from 2 years old and under. So he didn't just send them into Bethlehem, the small town itself, but the whole region of Judea. Herod commanded his men not only to enter Bethlehem, but also the large province, on account of the misquoted verse of the chief priests and scribes who said, Bethlehem of Judea. See, the chief priests and scribes really misquoted the actual prophecy of Micah. What prophecy actually said was, the small hamlet of Bethlehem, house of Ephrathah, art few in number to be reckoned among the thousands of Judah. You're a small town, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, among all of these thousands of people, but you will still be the one who produces, with whom the child was going to be born. So really, he should have concentrated on Bethlehem, but he wanted to cover the whole province. So that's why there were so many children killed. We hear about Rachel weeping for her children. In the gospel, Matthew says, then was fulfilled, which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, in Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they were no more. We hear this every Christmas, and it is, it's really happened. The terrible command was carried out to the letter. The gruesome slaughter began, and infants were transfixed by the points of swords. They were beheaded, drowned, and trampled underfoot. The soldiers just went crazy. Saint Romanus has another hymn. Just I'll summarize for you. They were hesitant. The soldiers were hesitant. They said to Herod, people are going to laugh at us. We're making war on babies. And Herod said, look, you're under authority. We're under Rome. You don't want me to go back and tell Caesar you're not a friend of Caesar. And, if you're not a friend of Caesar, that's the end of you. And so the soldiers thought about it and they said, well, you know what? Come to think of it, Bethlehem is known for producing kings. The most famous one, of course, was King David prior to this. So, yes, sir, Herod, whatever you say, we'll carry on. And so that happened. Why do we talk about Rachel in this? Because the gospel doesn't really speak about Rachel as any one individual mother, but what we're referring to here actually is the righteous foremother, Rachel. And she is the first related instance of a mother's death in childbirth in the Old Testament. She was the second wife of Jacob, the grandson of Abraham. She was the favored wife, actually, of Jacob, but he couldn't marry her until he married her sister, worked for 7 years, and finally got to marry Rachel, who was barren and could not bear children until God showed favor on her. So her scroll here says, God hath taken away my reproach. And so she bore 2 sons. She bore Joseph, the righteous Joseph, and Benjamin. And she died during Benjamin's childbirth. And she was buried near the road to Ephrathah in the district of Bethlehem. And so you see why Rachel is invoked here. Because she's a mother, the wife of the patriarch Jacob. Saint Ambrose of Milan wrote later, and Rachel died in childbirth because even then, as the patriarch's wife, she saw Herod's wrath and spared not the tenderest years. So Rachel actually is weeping for these children who hundreds of years later are going to be killed. And St. Ambrose goes on to say, Rachel wept for her babies that were washed with her tears and offered to Christ. So that's why that prophecy from Jeremiah was fulfilled in that year 4 BC. We can't forget about the righteous Elizabeth. Why? Well, the righteous Elizabeth is the mother of Saint John the Baptist. One of the mothers who understood that her 18-month-old child was in mortal peril was righteous Elizabeth, whose son, John, the firstborn and only son of the priest and her husband Zacharias, was certainly a target of Herod's soldiers. We read last week that Zachariah and Elizabeth lived in the hill country of Judah. They didn't live in Bethlehem, but they were close enough to Jerusalem because Zachariah was a priest, so he could go and do his priestly duties in Jerusalem. And so they're a target. St. John the Baptist, the infant, is a target too. And so she's afraid. And so she finds out the soldiers are searching for him. She's old, by the way, she's elderly. And she took the child and went up to the hill country and kept looking where she might conceal him, but there was no secret place to be found. Going up into the mountain, the elderly Elizabeth groaned with a loud voice, for she could not climb up. She's old, she's carrying an 18-month-old child, and she uttered, "O mountain of God, receive mother and child." Straightway the mountain cleaved, and that's up here at the top of this icon, and received Elizabeth and her son. A light shone around them, and an angel of the Lord was with them, watching over them. So that's how John the Baptist was saved from being killed by Herod's soldiers. You see the King Herod over here on the left, the massacre going on here. This is Joseph, Mary, and Jesus heading out. We'll talk about that next time. I don't have time for that today, but that's what happened to St. John the Baptist.
Mountain cleaved, what's that mean?
Broke open and allowed them to escape into a kind of like a cave open. And so that's how they escaped. Herod wasn't done though. What about his father? Meanwhile, in searching for infant John, Herod decided to send officers to his father, Zachariah the priest. At that moment, Zachariah was ministering at the altar, and they said to him, "Where is your son? Where have you hidden him?" He said, "Look, I'm a minister of God and a servant at the altar. I sit constantly in the temple. I don't know where my son is." They go back and told Herod. Herod says, "Kill him." So on Herod's orders, Zacharias was slain in the middle of the priestly service. He was slain and his blood spilled over the marble, and clotting stained the stones so that it could not be removed. Thus it remained as a testimony to Herod's wickedness. 40 days after the holy Zacharias reposed, the blessed Elizabeth also entered into rest, leaving behind the lad John in the wilderness, where he was fed by an angel guarded by God's providence. That's the upper right over there. That is Zechariah on the left being killed in the temple by the altar. This, by the way, the center little hole there, that's the cave where mother and child were held. And then obviously the murder going on here. And so this is kind of a complex icon. And so we have Zechariah being killed, Elizabeth reposing, and the young child, John the Baptist, being raised, and he never left the wilderness. He was raised in the wilderness, and the church of Jesus says he lived there all that up at the time where he came back into the area of Jordan and started baptizing
What was the relationship of Elizabeth to Mary? Yeah,
Cousins.
cousins.
cousins. Yeah. So actually, John the Baptist, according to the flesh, was related to Jesus, according to the flesh. So, and 40, years later, Jesus confirms that Zacharias was killed when he's talking to the scribes and Pharisees and saying to them, "Woe, you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." He's telling them, you killed, your forefathers killed all of the prophets before you. And they said, yeah, they did. We're proud of it. And he said to them, then all the righteous blood shed upon the earth will come upon you, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zachariah, the son of Bachariah, whom thou slew between the temple and the altar. So Jesus Christ confirmed what had been done. In fact, Christ is condemning them right from Cain all the way to the present time. As he said, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zachariah, the son of Barachiah. So that's the massacre of the infants. What about those infants? Well, they're commemorated in the church on December 29th. And they are considered some of the first martyrs of the church. Two of the hymns that we sing in that commemoration, as acceptable victims, as newly picked flowers and divine first fruits and newborn lambs, were ye offered unto Christ, who was born as an infant. The ungodly king seized the multitude of infants and transformed them into martyrs. For he knew not that they, being citizens of the kingdom on high, would expose his madness unto the ages. And so we commemorate them on the December 29th. They were the first Christian martyrs, so to speak, and they went right to be with God in heaven. Questions, comments, anything at all to add today?
Makes today's day and age seem not so bad, huh?
Not bad. Next time, 2 weeks from today, no class next Sunday or the New Year's Eve. January 7th, we'll be back. God willing. Thank you.
January 7th is the next class?
January 7th, next class. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Less than the water.
Yeah.
Grant, nice to meet you.
We started to make it out.
Charlie, looking forward to lunch tomorrow.
You too?
I didn't even know about 6 BC stuff.